Welcome to Save Us from Hell, a podcast about the United Nations. I am your co-host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am the editor-in-chief of UN Dispatch, and I host the Global Dispatches podcast.
I'm Anjali Dayal. I'm an associate professor of international politics at Fordham University in New York.
So the first polio case in Gaza in 25 years was confirmed last month. A baby became partially paralyzed, and from what we know, this baby was 10 months old and missed his regularly scheduled polio vaccination because of the war in Gaza. Now, this baby is likely harmed for life, and perhaps more worrying, because polio is so easily transmissible, there is a likelihood that it's being transmitted among unvaccinated children in Gaza. Now, just a little background. Before the war, polio had been eliminated, not just from Gaza, but the entire Middle East region. Vaccination rates there are just very, very high. But again, the nature of polio is such that until it is totally eradicated everywhere around the globe, it remains a threat. You've got to keep up vaccinations everywhere, or it may reemerge as it did in Gaza on August 23rd. So we are speaking on Wednesday, September 4th. And between that first confirmed case on August 23rd and yesterday, September 3rd, we have seen the successful implementation of a humanitarian intervention in Gaza by UNICEF, UNRWA, and the WHO. This intervention is intended to unfold under several phases to inoculate 640,000 children under the age of 10 in Gaza. Phase 1 completed yesterday with 189,000 children in central Gaza receiving their first of 2 doses of the oral polio vaccine. So for now, this vaccination campaign seems to be working. In a statement released yesterday, UNICEF called it a rare bright spot. Now, basically, the UN was able to negotiate with Israel and Hamas for humanitarian pauses in certain locations in central Gaza during certain hours so these vaccines could be distributed. It was also able to secure a cold chain. These vaccines are needed to stay cold, so they arrive in refrigerated trucks and need electricity and fuel to stay cold. So this seems to be just a rare example in this god-awful conflict of a humanitarian intervention gone right so far. Again, we're in the early stages of this, but things seem to be going right. So Anjali, my question to you is, why this? Why polio? And why now do you think we're finally getting a successful humanitarian intervention?
Infectious disease is one of the classic examples of things that we can only confront with a sense of the collective good, right? It doesn't matter if the children you perceive to be the children of your enemy are the children of your enemy, right? The fact that they can contract polio means that your children too can contract polio, right? You have to put something above a sense of mutual enmity in order to protect your children and your family and your life, right? Polio is enormously infectious. As you said, it transmits very well in the kinds of difficult conditions that are endemic in Gaza right now. And it's probably because of the full-scale collapse of the health system in Gaza that we're seeing this first emergence of polio in 25 years in Gaza. And so in that sense, this is an area where that is sort of primed for good cooperation if people value the lives of their children, right? And as a result, we've seen this. It's a small sort of space that's opened up, right? But even though it's a small space, it's a really meaningful space. And it's possibly a place where we're going to be able to see more points of cooperation emerge. I'm not sure. Dr. Tedros, the head of the WHO, right, said yesterday that the best vaccination is in fact peace, right? Until we can actually secure full-scale peace in the region, there isn't necessarily going to be a widespread emergence from this problem. But this is an important early step.
I wonder if also this space, this very narrow space that you described that's opened up for a humanitarian intervention, is because of the unique nature of polio itself, right? We're not seeing, cholera has killed way more children in Gaza than polio, which, impacted just one child so far. You're not seeing humanitarian pauses for the distribution of oral rehydration salts, which can combat cholera, but you are seeing it for this logistically very complicated like vaccination campaign around polio. And, you got to think about this again in the broader context of the Gaza conflict. I mean, just like a day before this first phase of the vaccination campaign began, the Israel shot up a World Food Program car. No one was killed, but Cindy McCain, the executive director, just like posted a picture of a clearly marked WFP car shot up with bullet holes. I mean, there has not been a reliable deconfliction mechanism for the provision of humanitarian relief in this conflict, but yet it's working right now thus far. Again, I think it's just because polio is polio, and the world has been and is really on the cusp of global polio eradication. Today, polio is endemic in only 2 countries in the world, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And even there, over the last 2 years, you're talking about like under 30, 40 cases total. So it's something that like inspires this massive response when other pressing issues don't, which I think is just interesting.
Yeah, like writing last year for the World Peace Foundation, Alex DeWall argued that we tend to undersell the big achievements of multilateralism because we understandably focus on all of the points at which it runs short, right? And, global efforts against polio have been one of contemporary multilateralism's most remarkable successes, right? In 1988, the World Health Assembly adopted a resolution for the eradication of polio, right? And wild polio cases are down 99% since 1988, right? From an estimated 350,000 cases in 125 endemic countries to 6 reported cases in 2021. And as you said, only 2 countries where wild polio is endemic, Pakistan and Afghanistan, right? And within that even, right, there are 3 strains of the wild polio virus. Type 2 was entirely eradicated in 1999. Type 3 was eradicated in 2021. Type 1 remains endemic in those 2 countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, you can let that one pass. Anjali, of course, is recording right next to one of New York City's largest hospitals.
That's right. But, that's like, just par for the course of New York, right? This is like it's a normal Wednesday in New York. But yeah, so this sort of like remarkable success, I think, is animating at least part of this effort, like you said. The other big success of the multilateral sort of global health apparatus is the eradication of smallpox, right? The only infectious disease that has been fully eradicated worldwide. A remarkable achievement, and polio is just on the cusp of that, right? Polio is also, I think, in people's living memory, right? This is not like a distant memory.
Oh, my grandmother had polio.
Yeah, I have blood relatives, not that much older than my parents whose lives have been permanently marked by polio, right? Because it was so endemic in so many places until the late 80s. And so to be this close to the cusp of it, I think, has to be animating at least some of this effort.
And it's worth giving, I think, a lot of credit to UN agencies for what they've been able to accomplish in this vaccination campaign, UNICEF, UNRWA, and the WHO. On the one hand, honestly, these like vaccination campaigns are very common and par for the course for the UN. They are able to and have like tried and true and tested ways of doing like mass vaccinations of very hard to reach populations. But rarely does this happen in hot war zones, almost never. And the fact that UNICEF in particular had been able to negotiate these kinds of humanitarian pauses while simultaneously undertaking the immense logistical efforts of maintaining the cold chain of these vaccines in a war zone, I think they do deserve a lot of credit. The UN gets a lot of criticism, and deservedly so, for its inability to stop conflict and stop fighting, particularly in Gaza, where the Security Council has not been effective in stopping this conflict. But at the same time, UN agencies that act, UNICEF, UNRWA, and the WHO, do deserve a good deal of credit for what they've been able to accomplish on the humanitarian front. And this polio vaccination campaign is just one example of that. But again, it's still early days. This could all go haywire. This again is being undertaken in 3 phases in different locations. That first phase in central Gaza is complete. Then comes South Gaza, Northern Gaza. Then a month from now, they need to do it all over again because this vaccine requires 2 doses about a month apart.
Yeah. And people are anxious for it, talking to sort of UN reporters yesterday, I believe. Louise Wateridge, who's the senior communications officer for UNRWA, said parents from other regions in Gaza were showing up in central Gaza, asking when their children could be vaccinated. So it's very clear that the demand and the anxiety are present there. The question is whether or not there can be enough political will to, facilitate all of this vaccination.